I'm afraid to think what might happen if. Have you ever said or heard someone say this? What a confession. The times we live in are so filled with lies, fear, and pressures that it's easy to reach a place where we can't think. Let's look at how to deal with today's pressures today with our thinking intact. Proverbs 23:7 says, they're always thinking about how much it costs, eat, drink, they say, but they don't mean it. Now, this is taken from, let me make sure I give you the version right. This is the New Living Translation. In the King James, it says, as a man thinks, so shall he be. Now, I want to put this in context, because in context, there's a lot going on here with food in your stomach and the process of your motivations, etc. And in fact, what it's kind of saying here is, if someone tells you go ahead and eat all you want, but they're a stingy person, they don't really want you to eat all you want. That's not what they have in mind. Okay? I don't know, you ever been out to eat with someone and they do the they set the bill on the table and they kind of go waiting for you to grab it, and then when you do, they go, oh, I was going to get that. Here. Yeah, you ever seen that? You know what I'm talking about? The slow grab kind of thing. Weird stuff. But anyway, so what can we learn from this passage in Proverbs? And I want to start by, like I said, in context, they're talking about being miserly, and there's several things here that deal with just food and that sort of thing. So let's look at that and say, first of all, people don't always tell you what they really mean, right? I'm keenly aware, and it's it just pops up in my head because I've talked about it before. But when someone says, "Well, let me be honest with you," well, what were you being before? Right? Well, to be completely truthful, were you not being completely truthful before? To be totally candid, so you weren't being candid before? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Words mean things. It's kind of weird. And unfortunately, I've gotten to the point now where when I'm talking, I hit certain places where I might have used a phrase like that, and I stop and think, I don't want to have them think that I haven't been being honest with them before, because I have, So, well, let me just lay this out for you very clearly, just to be sure that I'm communicating properly, But what we can learn from this is that, one, there's in Proverbs here, what it's talking about a lot is our motivations, right? A lot of what people say and do is driven by their emotions. And in fact, in our society right now, and I don't want to paint with such a broad brush that it comes across that I'm trying to fit everyone into these categories, without exception or whatnot. But for the most part in our country, we have a political divide between emotionalism and common sense. Well, it's uncommon now. It's just sense. Since they all lost their minds, and yet, so we have people who are they're completely motivated by feelings, and feelings are very powerful in your decision making, right? And they can be all kinds of emotions. They can be all kinds of emotionally based things we might not necessarily call emotion. If you're really hungry, is that an emotion? I would beg to differ. I would say that it's largely an emotional thing. You might even say, I'm starving. Dude, no one's never been 60 pounds overweight and starved, right? you, you got, you're not starving, you're hungry. You're being a little emotional about this, right? We even have the commercial about, you need a Snickers, right? So you don't be hangry or whatever, right? What is that? Your emotions are driving the situation because you're a little bit hungry. Maybe your blood sugar's a little low. Who knows, right? And so we call that common sense or thinking or whatever, even though someone's being irrational because they're hungry. I haven't eaten in almost 2 hours, right? So it drives how we see things. Someone says, you could lose blah, 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 and you get fearful, and so that starts affecting how you decide about things, right? Oh my goodness, if this person gets elected, there won't be a chicken in every pot, right? Some of you are old enough to get that reference. And then sometimes we say follow the science, right? The earth is warming, the oceans are rising, and we're all going to die. It's science. No, it's emotion. The science might even be completely different than that. But the emotion is you're going to make decisions based on that. You need an electric car. Never mind how much energy they consume in the production of same, et cetera, and the damage to the environment that's done through that process, blah, blah, blah. You need an electric car. You got to save the world. Save the world, buy a car. Right? Isn't that logical? No, it's emotional. And then when you start to be logical, people get upset. Stop it. Don't you care? Thought it was following the science. Science doesn't get worried about being tested. It's the process. But we end up in those situations, and we're driven by our emotions. As a man thinks, so shall he be. Now, think sounds logic. But sometimes we think with our stomach. I'm hungry, I'm starving to death. If I don't eat in the next few minutes, it's going to be the end. I'm only using that because, one, you're eating donuts, and two, because we can all relate to that, right? Is there anybody who has a fear of going over bridges? Nobody. My brother did. Under him bothers you a little bit? Going under bridges. A lot of people that have fear of going over bridges have also had addiction problems. Did you know that? It's really common. Anybody afraid to walk out of the house and to the trash bin and back in the dark? Y'all missed all those creepy sci-fi thriller movies? Okay. Just checking. But people have fears. Sometimes they're irrational. Right? I have an irrational fear of snakes. I don't like black widow spiders. But I really don't like rattlesnakes. But somebody said a rattlesnake bite is less venomous than a black widow bite. I don't want to get bit by either one. Right? But rattlesnakes scare me way more than black widows. Don't play on my fears. I'm trying to work past that, by the way. I'm a lot better when I have a 12 gauge in my hand, so it helps a lot. But you know what? How we think is shaped by what we dwell on. As a man thinks, so shall he be. If I dwell on things that are emotionally fearful, or if I feel bad about myself and I focus on that. It's the old adage of, there's a black dog and the white dog, and which one is gonna win in the battle. It's the one you feed, right? That's a really short Reader's Digest version of that story, but it's what you feed. It's what you dwell on. It's the things that you put in your brain and contemplate. There's people who say, well, I can't get past this. Why? It's because you keep feeding it. You keep dwelling on it. You keep thinking on it. Well, I can't forgive this. Why? Because you keep thinking on it. You keep dwelling on it. And you're dwelling on the hurt and the it's bad for you kind of thing. Well, I make all my decisions based on global warming. Why? Because you're thinking about it all the time, right? It's okay for one country to pollute, but you can't do anything, right? If you do anything at all, you're a bad person. I don't know. I'm probably going to get censored for all this because I'm not paranoid. I'm not. So Psalms 23, which is one of my favorite verses, and we all know it very, very well. And we've talked about it many times, but I just want to make a reference here. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, brings honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I'll not be afraid, for you're close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever." It's very common. We know it, right? By the way, you notice there's food involved here, too. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. And I've said this before, but it says he makes me lie down, or it causes me to lie down. Because he wants us to rest. Because here's the thing. When you're really hungry, you don't always make the best choices. You ever gone shopping when you were super hungry? As expensive as fast food has gotten, you would be way better off to slide into McDonald's, grab a burger, and then go shopping, because it'll be way cheaper than if you go to the store while you're hungry. Oh, that looks good. I need that. Yeah. I should try some of that, Do you have a sample? Yes. And you just get a little taste, and then you're like, now I'm really hungry. I need to buy that and that. And there you go. Makes me lie down. Makes me rest. And it's in green pastures. And here's the thing. Green pastures, we get the green part is like new and fresh and tender. And, it's the idea of, so if we're talking food again, right? If you're a sheep, that's what you're wanting to eat, right? That's the gourmet stuff, right? But I find it interesting, the word pastures there can really be translated home. It makes me stop and rest and be nourished in a new home, a new place that's home, right? It just feels like home. And what are we at home in? We're at home in his provision. We're at home in him taking care of it. We're at home in our rest in him. Instead of in my head, which is filled with all these things and running 900 miles a minute. I can do a pretty good job of multitasking, in spite of the fact that I frequently say the definition of multitasking is doing two things poorly at once. Probably not as good as I used to be, but I can have multiple things going on and keep track of it and do pretty well at it. But it's not my best work. I can be under pressure, and I can do pretty well under pressure. Not as well as I used to. It's a bad part about getting older, I think. But the reality is, I don't do my best work under pressure. I've always admired sports figures that could perform well under pressure. I've told stories of Joe Montana. It's not that I was a Joe Montana fan, or I wasn't even a 49er fan when he was playing for them at all, but I appreciated his ability under pressure. I liked George Blanda with the Raiders because of his ability under pressure. I liked Kenny Stabler with the Raiders because of his ability under pressure. I respected a number of NFL quarterbacks because that's a really easy place to see them under pressure. There's basketball players that are great under pressure. But as good as they are, I guarantee you they're not as good as they would be without pressure. Right? Under pressure, you make mistakes. Under pressure, if you put people under real pressure, and they do this a lot of times in self-defense classes, they train teacher, if you're in the military or in the law enforcement, they try and create pressure. They tell you one of the first things that happens is your small motor skills go away. And it's true. When you're in a super stressful situation, your ability to manipulate the little things goes away, and it's like, big motor skills are all that you have left. Because your body is not able to process all that pressure and stuff. Your mind is no different. You can train your mind to deal with certain pressures and things. But the reality is, I need God to make me calm down and rest in a new place where he can restore me, because under pressure, eventually, I start making bad decisions and I start dealing with the consequences of those bad decisions. And when I make bad decisions under pressure, the bad decisions I make create more what? Pressure. They create more pressure. And so you start into a spiral. It's the death spiral, right? You start spiraling down because you're making bad decisions, and it's getting worse and worse as it goes. At the time, it might seem like a good decision, but it's not, particularly if you look back at it. That's one of the things that's really interesting about watching legal things play out. Doesn't matter what they are. I know we've had our faces probably glued to the TV over the election or the presidential case there in New York and all that stuff. But it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, if you sit and listen to any kind of an analysis of a situation, it could be a car accident, right? So you swerved left into oncoming traffic. Why? Well, there was no place to go. Well, that was the last place you wanted to go. Now you're head on with somebody else. That was stupid. Well, in hindsight, maybe it was. Maybe I'd have been better off to just rear end the car ahead of me instead of hit somebody head on, right? I didn't make a good decision, right? I worked with somebody one time who was in a bad car accident, and he said, well, this car pulled out and they hit me, and I started to go off the shoulder of the road, and I thought, oh, this is not going to be good, so I just let go of the steering wheel because I knew I was going to be in an accident. I was like, you let go of the steering wheel because you were going to be in an accident? That doesn't seem smart to me. It seems like that would have been a really dumb decision. But in the moment, it seemed good. And we create time constraints for ourselves. And so we create false pressure, right? We create false pressure because we created a time frame. So John 11:39 says, this is talking about Lazarus, and in verse 39 it says something. It says, roll the stone aside, Jesus told them, talking about Lazarus. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Well, she was being very practical. She'd thought of everything. She said, if you'd have just been here, he wouldn't have died. She said, I know that even now, if you wanted to, you could, raise him up. He'll be raised up in the future, right? The resurrection. And yet, when he starts to actually address her problem, she says, "Oh, wait! The timing's not good." Right? Self-imposed time frame, my own thinking. Right? We do this all the time. We take things and we create false pressures. There are people who don't function well unless they have pressure. But it's because they can't rest in the green pasture. It's because they can't let God lead them to rest. And so what they end up doing is keeping false pressure or pressure on themselves. And so you don't rest. When you don't rest, your mind doesn't work as well as it does when you do rest. There's a lot of things that happen to your body when you don't rest, when you don't have a Sabbath, right? It's not good. If you look up workaholic in the dictionary, you'll see my picture. So I'm not saying this lightly. I'm talking to myself at the same time, I guarantee you. When we let our emotions drive our thought process, we're going to make bad decisions. When we create false pressures, when we succumb to the pressures that are around us, sometimes the pressure is real. My mom was the fastest Jesus caller on the planet. And what I mean by that is, something would go wrong. She could say, Jesus, 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 really fast. And she meant every one of them. And she was the quickest one to it, right there. That was the place she was going for her help right now. Didn't matter what it was. She was quick to go to God. What are you quick to go to? I'm hungry. I've got time constraints. The situation feels scary or dire. So what are you going to do? I'm going to make an emotional decision and screw it up and make it worse. Or I'm going to go to Jesus. Jesus, I need you, God. He's instant to respond to your prayers. You can say, well, I remember I prayed one time for a long time about blah, blah, blah. Well, who created the time pressure in that? Probably you. Could have been circumstances. But you chose to respond to him that way. Instead of saying, you know what, I'm starting to get stressed about this. I need to stop and go to Jesus. See, don't be afraid to think. Right? I'm afraid to think what might happen if. Don't be afraid to think. Think, I'm going to turn this over to God. And it doesn't matter what happens if, because he's got it. Because he'll give me what I need, whether it's a resource or whether it's a piece or whether it's a word or whether it's an idea or a wisdom or whatever it might be. I remember back in the probably mid to late 70s, there was a guy who wrote a whole series of books about being a king's kid. And he tells a story about being on an airplane and they couldn't land because the landing gear wouldn't come down. And they tried everything. They couldn't get the landing gear to come down. So they were going to have to belly slide. And, that's a great way to be in a fiery crash, right? And he just prayed and said, God, show me what's wrong. He's not an aeronautical engineer. And he wasn't flying the plane. He was just a passenger. But he prayed, God, show me what's wrong. And all of a sudden he had a vision of a hydraulic schematic, and he could see where the problem was. And he was able to tell the stewardess, who told the pilot, and the co-pilot was able to access the specific area that he saw, knew when he explained it what it was. He knew where that was. And he was able to fix it, and the landing gear came down, and they landed safely. But you could have been afraid to think what might happen when we belly slide in. You could have been sitting there all panicked and fearful. There's a book I read many, many, many years ago called Watership Down. I'm not recommending it or not. It's kind of like Animal Farm with a little different perspective, but it's about all these rabbits, and there's some that are military and blah, blah, blah. And they talk about when the rabbits panic, we would call it the deer in the headlights look, that they go tharn, meaning they can't move because they're just frozen in fear. But see, that's what fear does to you. It freezes you up. It freezes up your brain instead of the peace of God, which releases you to do whatever God directs you to do. Don't be thorned, right? Have the peace of God. Go to God with your problem. You don't have to be frozen. What we're talking about here is thinking with emotion or thinking with logic. You can be so logical that you're just scary stupid. Or thinking with faith. If you can tell yourself, I'm going to begin to think with faith. What does that mean? I'm going to begin to go to God with my problems and ask him for the solutions. I'm going to have a dialogue with God about what I go through during my day. I'm going to have a dialogue with God with what the problems are. I'm going to have a dialogue with God about the pressures. And as I dialogue with God about this stuff, I don't have to stress, I don't have to worry, and I don't have to be the source of all the stuff that comes around. I can trust God to provide what I need, when I need it, how I need it, and I can rest and have peace in him, and my thinking will become clear. Why is this important? Because faith is the beginning and the end of it all. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, the life. He says, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, beginning and the end. He says, I am your peace. He says, I'm the author and finisher of your faith. Well, guess what? If he's my faith, he's the beginning and the end of it all. And everything in between. I can just go to him with my thinking. I can take my thoughts to him. And if you begin to create that habit, that practice of going to God with everything, just have a running dialogue with God, your thinking will improve dramatically, and so will your daily life experience, because you're taking it to God, the one who can do something about it. When should I start this? Today. I should start it today. If you walk out of here starting that process and you stick with it for about 2 weeks, you know what? It'll be a lot easier from that point forward. If you have to, put a Post-it note right there on the refrigerator that says, think with faith. How? Well, I put God in charge. In my spirit, in my mind, in my body, and there's in my physical things that I'm dealing with. I'm hungry. Hey, God, I'm hungry. And he might give you a thought like, well, he eat a Snickers. It worked for the guy on TV. Try it. You know, who knows, right? See, it comes down to this. I said I'm talking to myself a whole bunch today. And, it's been a crazy little bit here in my world, and I've had to deal with just a lot of stuff, pressures, etc. And I find it's sometimes for me, maybe not surprising to you, but music or songs, that helps me keep my mind in the right place. And so the commitment is, God, I look to you. And that song that we sing says, God, I look to you. I won't be overcome. I won't be overwhelmed by all this stuff. God, I'm going to look to you. And so that's what I would encourage you to do today is take your conversation to God. Take your thinking to God and say, God, I look to you in this situation. God, I look to you. I'm not going to be overcome by it. I'm not going to submit to the pressure and all those things. I'm not even going to live in that. I'm going to live in a new home, one that you've prepared for me where I can rest and get what I need. And I might be in the presence of my enemies, but it doesn't matter because I'm in the new place you created for me that has everything I need. God, I look to you today. I won't be overwhelmed. I won't be overcome. I won't be taken down. I am looking to you because you're my source, God, for everything. And that's it for this week.